So what's up, guys, and we're back with the next part of the Learn Linux series, and today I'm going to talk about how to learn Linux. So a lot of times when we say, hey, learn Linux, or yeah, you want to get into such and such field, learn Linux, it's confusing to answer what that actually means. So I'm going to break that down. So the first thing to realize with this question is, what are your goals? So for example, if you want to learn desktop, you just want to use it as your regular operating system. You don't really need to go that crazy into depth into some of the things that we will be talking about. You can just use your OS as if it's any other OS. Point and click, open the browser, use your Office applications, your spreadsheets. Nothing really changes other than a few additional tools that are now at your disposal and a few additional ways to do things that you might implement into your workflow. Maybe you want to do server use. So then your learning path involves, for example, learning how to do permissions, how to do configs and edit those configs, understanding how networking works to some level, understanding how to configure services. A bunch of stuff comes into play when it comes to servers. And maybe if you want to get a job within Linux, that of course includes server use. However, there's other things related to getting a job with Linux these days. It's not just learning Linux. You again have to know networking, but you also have to know just physical, actual networking, as in routes, things like that, routes and switching. You need to learn cloud to some extent. That's very important these days. Some kind of automation tool, perhaps Puppet, Ansible, or Chef, or something along those lines of tools, which are expected of employees in 2021. For maybe you want to do cybersecurity, and you heard that Linux is the best way to do that, which isn't necessarily true. It's just a tool that you can use throughout your security journey. Now, maybe you would just want to do it for fun. Maybe you just want to learn all these things. Maybe you're just into technology like I am, and you just want to learn cool things. So depending on your goals is how you will determine in which way to learn. So now, if we're talking about GUI versus command line, typically when we're talking about learning Linux, we're referring to the command line. The GUI is nice and all, but it's more so for the regular user, just to point and click, use your browser, use your file browser, listen to music, etc. For the most part, the challenging things about Linux are not the GUI. Anybody, including a child, can pick up and learn the GUI within a matter of a day, and much less actually, probably a few hours. But the command line, learning how to use those bash tools, learning how to efficiently build pipelines to process data, for example, or to improve some kind of inefficiency in your workflow, that's really what Linux is about, is learning how to use these tools that come with Linux that originally stemmed from Unix, that were built to enhance your workflow. And of course, it's not mutually exclusive. You still have to learn the GUI as well, and sometimes you might even require the GUI. So, right, let's say with you're trying to get a job, right, and you're configuring desktops, you still need to be able to go into the settings panel and perhaps maybe configure or troubleshoot some kind of problem. Let's say joining to an LDAP directory or Active Directory or something like that. Maybe you're using Cockpit to manage your servers, or FreeIPA, which has a web interface. So there's still some essence of using a GUI. It's not like you're completely in the command line and you have to be there all the time. You can if you want, but it's not necessarily where you have to be. It's just the best place to be if you want to take the most advantage out of Linux. And of course, I say see previous slide here, and what I mean by that is, again, it still depends on what you're trying to do. As I was saying earlier, if you're just using a desktop, you really don't need to go crazy with how much you learn in terms of the command line. And of course, to learn Linux, it's all practice. Lab every day. Use Linux. If you do not use Linux, if all you do is watch my videos, you follow along, and that's all you do, you will never learn Linux, period. You have to be consistently using it on a regular basis. You need to be encountering your own problems, encountering your own errors, trying different things, trying to maybe automate things or write scripts. You need to be actively using it so you can encounter problems, you can learn new things, so you can do your own research, and essentially there's no other way that you will really learn. You can read as many books as you want, but it won't make you a good Linux user unless you practice it. And of course, you have to be open to exploring new methods. There is a Unix philosophy, a Linux/Unix way of doing things, and essentially there's 4 tenets to this. So each program must do one thing and do it well. expect the output of every program to become the input to another completely random program, and we'll talk about that later. You'll see how pipes work. As you can see, it was made by this guy, Doug McIlroy, very famous. Design and build software to be tried early instead of waiting weeks or months for the full project to be finished. So that's for the development of the actual tools and software to help with that, with the efficiency of that. And of course, using tools instead of unskilled help, even if it means spending extra project time building that tool. So let's say you need to process a list of names and sort them in alphabetical order by last name. Sure, you can have somebody do that by hand, or maybe put into an Excel sheet or something and then do some macros. Or you could build a small tool using Unix or Linux, and even if you throw that tool out right after you finish, it's still part of the Unix philosophy to build the tool anyways, because you might need it later in the future. And it's better to have it than not to have it later, even if it takes extra time. So just be open-minded. Just be willing to understand that not everything is the way you're used to it in Windows. So, right, you might be used to, okay, yeah, in Windows I can just click and I can have group policy and I can set some settings. Why isn't it like that on Linux? It can be, but that's not, it's not necessarily like that because there's a Linux way of doing things, right? So in Linux, we might use an automation tool like Ansible or Puppet and have that repo set those settings for us. So why would we need to click a button if we already have a written config that does all that for us? So just be open to understanding that you're no longer in Windows, you're no longer using Mac. There is going to be differences, and be open to learning those differences, adopting those differences, and not just asking yourself, why can't I do the same thing that I used to do on Windows? Because there probably is a way to do it, it's just not the way you think it is. And with that, I leave you, and I will say, just once again reiterating, you must lab, you must practice the things that I'm teaching you on your own time, make your own mistakes. And with that, see you in the next video.